Okay. So this sounds ominous, but I don't quite go quite as far as Andy just did. I just go to the beginning of the web here with Tim Berners-Lee. Early in the days of the web, we didn't have dynamic applications. All we had was static files. And actually, the first thing that Tim Berners-Lee put together was just some basic HTML, some links, and some basic calls to an HTTP server that ran on the next workstation sitting by himself on his desk. We quickly started with static websites. We quickly started to look at other options. We started to generate content on the fly or via scripts so that we could, for example, know whether or not there was coffee in the CERN storage room and not have to go down to the rooms. And we built different scripts to generate information about weather and other data. We figured out how to write web applications using things like CGI, Perl scripts, shell scripts, and so on, so that we could do it right on the fly as part of a request-response cycle. And these applications grew until they needed some more content. So it needed some databases, so we could go ahead and say, here's the content I need to present. These days, we're using data stores, NoSQL, and so on. And we keep having to grow and scale. And what we're learning here is that scaling is hard. You go in and you start with a web server and a database on the same machine on your laptop as you write applications. You start to go ahead and push them out, and you need another web server. You need another database server. You go to Mongo, you have replica sets, and you have sharded clusters. And soon you have a small nightmare to manage, and you start to look like this. And sometimes you need it. If you are Twitter, Facebook, GitHub, you need that complexity just to handle the traffic, just to handle what you need to push out. If you're the Obama campaign, you do need as well the complexity just to keep track of everybody you're talking to. We, however, don't all need that. Sometimes, in some cases, you might be able to get away with just generating some static content. You might be able to get away with this by not having a database, not having a data store, just having data that you pull from a file system that you use to build your site. And these days, thanks to Amazon and other service providers, you don't even have to run your own servers or even your own instances in the cloud. You can push it out to S3 and not have to worry about things like scalability, web load balancers, and so on. Today, I'm going to talk about a tool called Middleman, which is great at doing all these things. So what is Middleman? It's a static site generator. There's a few of those around. If you are part of the GitHub community, you probably know about GitHub Pages and Jekyll, Autopress, and so on. But the nice thing here is Middleman is built on top of Padrino, which is kind of a sibling of Rails. It takes Sinatra and it puts together some data access, some view layers, and integrates it nicely. The great thing about Sinatra is it's a rack application, which has some great implications, and we'll talk about some of those through the talk. Middleman is all about the view layer. As you have a static site, you don't have controllers, you don't have access to a database. So all that Middleman focuses on is how to build a view. So you basically have things like templates and layouts and partials, things that you're already comfortable with if you're a Rails developer. You also have view helpers, which are great to be able to dry up your templates. And we'll see some of those moving forward. There's a few templating options. So if you're doing Rails apps, you already know about ARB. You probably already are using Aerobus. Haml is also a great option if you like to take out all the clutter from your templates. Markdown is great if you have strict content. I run my blog on Middleman, and I use Markdown for the content. It makes it easy to just have to think through the content itself, maybe some details about styling, but not have to focus on the details of what tags you're using. And there's a few others that are more esoteric if you like that kind of stuff. The nice thing about the templates is that they are composable. You can go ahead and, for example, use ERB to insert values into your Markdown template before you pass it to Markdown and turn it into an HTML document. It reads from right to left. So you start with ERB, Markdown, and then the index itself. Or you're probably more familiar with index.html.erb as a way to present it. While we don't have access to a database when the site is deployed and running, we do have access to data. And we'll go into more details further down. A nice thing with Middleman is it's configuration-driven. Since you don't have a controller on your application or on your website, you can just go ahead and tell and config, for example, what path you have, which path it generates, but also, for example, what extensions to load and how to build your site. And we'll cover some of those examples as well further down. So we're going to start with this here. So this is the development cycle. You're building a site. You have some content you want to put out. And what we're doing here is running it. I have a fairly contrived example of a simple theme page that I've put together for this talk. It's pretty simple. We have an index, a few pictures, some links. We have some detailed pages down, and all this is data-driven. This is all running right now, right here. By default, Middleman uses the same port as Sinatra, so 4, 5, 6, 7, but my presentation is also running on Middleman, so I borrowed 4, 5, 6, 8. This is all you have to do, just run Middleman server, and you're ready to go. And if I look up, we'll see that this is how I'm running the page right now. So when you run the tool, what happens is that Middleman boots up a rack application and runs it. Loads all the middleware that we have configured in the config file, and then you access it like you would normally in another rack application, a Sinatra app or a Rails app. At this point, it's still dynamic. Middleman has some ability to provide some data. So there's a front matter. The front matter is great. It's kind of metadata for your page. You just look at the current page. What is running right now? You can get to it via a helper called current page, and the helper has a method called data. And this is what it looks like. So here we have it in YAML. This is a simple theme page, for example. It's great also for tags. It's great for other things that you may want to put in the page information, like title, which layout you want to use. So the blogging engine uses that information as well. If you're into JSON, you can use JSON as well. Similar syntax, it just looks a little bit different here. So you have the title, the simple page. I've been in Ruby for a few years. I actually prefer the YAML version personally, but it's a matter of taste. We see here we can use the current page to get the data in the title, and this is what it becomes based on the data. So in the page, this is what it looks like. We can see right on top here, we have the title being defined. When the page is loaded, we can see in the tab here the title being set. So formatter is great for metadata, the kind of stuff where you can just provide information about the page. But the nice part about building a data-driven site is you can use actual data to build it. So for example, you can use local data in Middleman, which is just a set of JSON files or YAML. Again, it's based on your matter of taste. And it's stored in your project under data. And is available via the data helper. And this is what it looks like in a project. So here in my project, I have a data file, a data directory, and there's a team.yaml file that I can read as I build my page. You can, in this case, we have a team.yaml file, and this is what exactly it looks like. There we go. So, you have any fields that you want. So in this case, I have a slug, a name, a title that's defined there, and a bit of a bio, which I borrowed from Dojo 4, where I used to work. That data is passed to the page. So you go in and, for example, if you want to build an index page of all the team members, you go in and say, well, for each of the items in my team local data, do the following. So in this case, we're adding an image tag so we can have a picture displayed. And we go ahead and add a link so we can go to a page further down. And we'll see a bit more about that in a few moments. Once you render it, it looks just like this. So in this case, I have the simple team page with myself on top and a link to a detailed page, and other team members that people I used to work with until a few weeks ago. It's nice that you have the ability to go ahead and say, well, here's some data to put on the page, but the nice thing about Middleman is you can actually generate pages that people can go to. So if you have multiple members in your team, each member can have its own page. You do this in the configuration file, and you say for each of the team members, go ahead and create this page, create this location. So the team, the members that link, use the team template, and then pass some variables to it. And this is what the team template looks like. Oh, it will create pages just like this. So we had Fred, Peter, Anthony. It will create links to those pages in the file system. And this is how you use the data here as you build your page. So in my project, on the source, team.html, I go ahead and build a page for an individual team member here. So in this case, I create a section with image tag and so on, and an aside block to be able to say, well, these are the links to other things. If I go back to my sample page, I click here. Here's the information I have, the bio, and other fun stuff. So this is generated dynamically. I can go in and change my data and change the content. So I like to go by Fred. If I go here and reload, there we go. It will go ahead and show Fred Jean here, and if I click on the link, it should have updated. It's a demo guide. So when your page is generated, you can see here that all the placeholders have been replaced. So we had the link to the image that we had on top, the link to my GitHub profile, and the others links that I provided. It's all good. So far, there's no real benefits to Middleman beyond building a Rails app. All you're doing is accessing a server that's generating your content as you go. But that's just the ability to do things as part of the build cycle. What we're going to do next is take that content and package it into a set of HTML and CSS files. So we go here. I happen to have a shell hidden here. And I will build it. So what the build command does is, again, boots up the stack, starts the application and certainly middleware they have configured, and it walks through the sitemap, which is a data structure that Middleman maintains. That is a pointer and a link to all the sites that you have, all the pages that you have on your site. It goes some cleanup, applies different extensions to it, and you end up with static content. So at this point, I could say open, build, team. And again, it goes locally using the file URL, and then the pages are showing up. One thing that happened here is as I was building the site is I applied a bunch of extensions, things that help us either optimize the page or change the content as it goes. Middleman comes with a lot of very helpful page optimization tools, such as minifying CSS and your JavaScript. You can push the images that you have so that they are optimized for the website. You can go ahead and also minify the HTML, take out all this extra white space, quotes, everything that you don't need to still generate compliant HTML that you can load up at that point. One of my favorite ones is using gzip to compress your text content so that it takes a lot less bandwidth going down. You can also do things like managing assets, so dealing with path to your assets so you can have relative paths as you build content that has images associated with pages, for example, or using asset hash, which makes it easier to cache. With an asset hash, it puts the fingerprint of the document and adds it up. I mean, a lot of these things are also happening if you, in Rails. You have the asset pipelines, you have Sprocket. The same tool is also available in Middleman. And the whole reason you do this is, beside being nice to your user, trying to have a page that loads faster, it saves you money because you use less bandwidth and less storage. So once we've worked on the site, we built it, it's all dynamic, it's all HTML at this point, it's all static content, we still need to publish it somehow. At that point, we have not yet pushed it out, so people can only use our laptop. And this is a step we're going to take here. So I wrote a nifty gem a few months ago, working for the Dojo for, taught us to just make sure we push what we needed for one of our clients that had a relatively large website. The timeline here, as you can see, is that it's a gem that tries really hard not to push files to S3, but it will do so if it must. So S3 is configured as part of the configuration screen here. So going back to Vim. We can go ahead and say, as an extension, activate S3 so that we can then publish it to the website. And all we have to do is tell it which bucket to go to and also which region to apply. You do have to provide AWS credentials, so I tend not to put them in my config.rb. I put them as part of the environment variables. Somebody asked me to implement a feature where we could drop a .s3 sync file at the root of your project to be able to load it. The main reason here is if you have a public Git repo that you're using to host your site, you probably don't want to provide your S3 credentials. So this gives them the ability to do just that. And then you push it. So I can go in here, go back to my shell, and say, and publish it. So S3 figures out what it needs to update, and it starts to push them. And in this case, we had a couple of updates that came from a change in the team.yaml file. So now that content is in S3. So nice things about S3 Sync is, besides trying to figure out only what you need to push, it also figures make sure that the ACL is set properly so that the world can see your content. It applies some caching headers if you need to. It goes in and figures out if you have gzip files and you want to publish those instead of the expanded files. You can push them out and not have to, be able to be nice to your users and provide some compressed content. The reason why we chose S3 or why I chose S3 for this is it supports acting as a web server. And all you have to do is pick a bucket and configure it. And don't worry, I have an easier to read version of this. You go in and say, well, this is index document. If you don't have a file to provide, look for index.html. And if there's an error, whether because you are not allowed to get to the page, you forgot to set the ACLs, or because you can't find the page, present this as an error page. Once you have your bucket set up, there is a bit of a URL here. It's not clear. But S3 will give you a URL you can go to poke at it and see how things are going. You probably don't want to use it for actual websites, though, because it's not easy to remember. It's the name of your bucket, the region, the website, AWS. It's relatively long. So what you want to do is set up DNS to serve it. One thing here is the host name you pick has to match the bucket name so that Amazon knows how to route to your place. In most cases, you'll just need a CNAME. But sometimes, if you want to have a naked domain, for example, you may have to use something called an alias, which is not standard. It is, however, supported by Route 53. DN Simple works pretty well, and there's also another company called DNS Made Easy that supports a name record. So, for example, if you have www.fredgene.net, you don't need an alias. You can just use a CNAME. If you have fredgene.net, then you need to use alias. Just some vulgarities of DNS. And at that point, people can go into your website and access it via the web, via the S3 bucket. So here, this one is actually comes from the bucket. We've seen Fredgene has changed. And we have, there we go, we have a page updated. So wrapping up, we went ahead and we had a workflow. We used Middleman to build a site. Now, a very contrived example of a team page. We built it, packaged it, set up as HTML, some CSS, and JavaScript. And we published it to the web where our users can go ahead and look at it. We can't quite go back to the early days of the web where everything was just statics and documents and links. I mean, early on, they didn't even have images. But we are able, with a bit of thinking, to pick different tools, pick some solutions that match better what we're trying to do, and possibly help us make it easier and simpler to serve out content and serve out our customers and our users. Thank you for your time. I'm Frederick, or Fredgene. I can be reached via these links.